Cave Incident. On June 15, 2002, 26-year-old Mark Orr and 3 friends had traveled to explore Cave in Florida. All 4 divers were certified open water divers with basic scuba training. The group had basic scuba gear but not cave diving equipment like redundant air systems. They brought one rope to use as a guideline to follow back to the entrance. The water at the cave entrance was impossibly clear. They descended into the water and the first few minutes were magical. The cave opened into a large chamber with stunning rock formations, but as they moved deeper, the passages became narrower and natural light faded to black. They were now completely dependent on their flashlights to see. Then disaster struck when one diver accidentally kicked the cave floor. A cloud of silt exploded upward like an underwater dust storm. Within seconds, the crystal clear water turned into a brown soup. Visibility dropped to 0 where Mark couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Panic set in immediately as Mark couldn't see his fellow divers or the guideline. Mark reached out blindly trying to find the rope or his diving partners. His hands found only rock walls and water. As panic increased, his air consumption skyrocketed as panic drove his breathing rate higher and higher. In panic conditions, a tank could be empty in just 15 minutes. Mark's hands scraped against limestone walls as he searched desperately for the way out. Then Mark remembered passing through a large chamber with an air pocket earlier. With his air gauge approaching 0, Mark made a desperate gamble. He stopped swimming horizontally and instead kicked upward, hoping to find that air pocket. His head broke the surface just as his regulator delivered its last breath of air. Mark gasped in the cave air with his heart pounding hard. He was alive, but his situation was still desperate in the darkness. He was in an air pocket roughly 10 feet wide with a small ledge above water. Mark hauled himself onto the ledge. Now came the worst part, the waiting in absolute darkness. Mark had no idea if his fellow divers had made it out safely. He was alone deep inside an underwater cave with no air supply. Exhausted from the ordeal, Mark fell asleep leaning on the cold ledge. Above ground, Mark's diving partners had managed to escape the cave. They emerged panicked, realizing Mark was still missing, and immediately called for help. Scott Hunsucker, a certified cave diving instructor, received the call about the missing diver. 6 hours after Mark entered the cave, Hunsucker descended into the water. He navigated the cave system with expertise. He carried redundant air systems, multiple powerful lights, and proper guidelines. When Hunsucker reached the large chamber with the air pocket, he surfaced cautiously. There was Mark Orr, alive, leaning on a ledge in his dive gear. Hunsucker gave Mark a spare regulator connected to his redundant air system. Using proper cave diving techniques and following a guideline, Hunsucker led Mark out. Birkwith Cave Incident. In 2005, an experienced cave diver entered a remote British cave system to continue exploration work. The exploration had been abandoned 30 years earlier by other divers. Birkwith Cave is located in the Yorkshire Dales of England. The cave had been partially explored back in the 1970s. Colin Pryor was an experienced cave diver qualified to take on this challenge. He understood the unique dangers of exploring flooded underground passages. The sections of Birkwith that Pryor was diving were low, narrow passages filled with fine silt. In the 1970s, the original divers laid guideline through the passages they explored. When those divers finished, they didn't remove all their guidelines from the cave. Over 30 years, this old line had deteriorated and become loose. It was now floating freely in the flooded passages. Pryor entered the water and began his dive. He was laying his own guideline as he went deeper into the system. He navigated through the tight passages, carefully avoiding stirring up fine silt. As Pryor pushed deeper, he began encountering the old guideline from the 1970s explorations. At first, this wasn't alarming as it confirmed he was following the original route, but Pryor didn't realize how degraded and dangerous this old line had become. Instead of being secure and attached, it had become loose and floating everywhere. As Pryor continued deeper, he encountered more and more of this deteriorated line. It was draped across the route, hanging from the ceiling, and coiled on the floor. In the confined space, it was almost impossible to avoid contact with the old line. As he maneuvered through a tight section, the old guideline wrapped around his equipment. In the limited visibility, Pryor didn't notice it at first, but as he moved forward, the entanglement got worse with every movement. The old line wrapped around more of his equipment, creating complex tangles. Pryor realized he was caught and immediately stopped moving to assess his situation. In cave diving, entanglement is one of the most feared hazards. Pryor reached for his knife to cut away the old guideline wrapped around him. But the old line wasn't just wrapped around one piece of equipment. It was tangled around multiple points on his body and gear, creating a complex web. Every time Pryor cut away one section, he discovered more tangles elsewhere. Pryor realized he was in serious trouble with the entanglement more complex than he thought. His air supply was running lower than it should be for his position. The silt was stirring up from all his movement, reducing visibility to 0. As his air supply continued to drop, Pryor made increasingly desperate decisions. The final minutes of Colin Pryor's life would have been absolutely terrifying. He knew his air was running out and he was still trapped. He knew that time had run out for any chance of reaching safety. As his air supply finally ran out completely, Pryor took his last breaths. Colin Pryor drowned in that low, silty passage in Birkwith Cave. Whiting's Neck Cave Incident. On November 17, 1979, 4 experienced spelunkers from the Baltimore Grotto, arrived at the Whiting's Neck Cave. Whiting's Neck Cave sits in the Panhandle area of West Virginia. By 1979, it had earned a reputation as an easy, beginner-friendly cave system. Richard Trayer, George Nichols, Mike Lures, and Steve Jensen were all seasoned cave explorers. They had brought along 4 novices getting their first real caving experience. The group entered through the back entrance and made their way to the main feature. The main feature was a 45-foot inclined drop that required proper rope work to descend safely. The Baltimore Grotto members rigged a handline on the left side of the drop. All 8 members of their group went down without incident as planned. Then a second group arrived at the top of the drop and things started going wrong. This second group was led by someone described as a military type A personality. He seemed knowledgeable and projected confidence, convincing about 15 teenagers to follow him. Of these 15 young people, 2 were deaf, adding communication difficulties. The leader of the second group looked at the Baltimore Grotto's handline and rejected it. Instead of using the safe setup, he rigged his own line right in the middle. He placed it directly over a 10-foot section of completely free vertical drop. The Baltimore Grotto members offered to let the second group use their handline twice, but the military-type leader refused both times, convinced his way was better. Then members of the second group started body rappelling down the poorly positioned rope. Steve Jensen and others watched in horror as the group had no idea what they were doing. Jensen yelled for Richard Trayer because someone was going to get seriously hurt or killed. In the next few minutes, the situation went from bad to catastrophic. One deaf girl fell 20 feet down the drop, tumbling and bouncing off the rock face. Miraculously, she wasn't seriously injured. Before anyone could respond, another person fell, dropping 10 feet before hitting the slope. Again, through luck, there were no serious injuries. 2 other members had made it partway down before becoming completely stranded. They had descended to a point where they couldn't continue down or climb back up, terrified and unable to move. The Baltimore Grotto members watched this disaster with horror and anger. The military-type leader had refused help and was now responsible for multiple falls. There were still more people from his group waiting at the top to attempt descent. Someone was going to die if they didn't intervene immediately and forcefully. Steve Jensen and his companions confronted the leader and gave him a direct order. Leave the cave now and take your group with you. It wasn't a suggestion, but a command. But first, they had to deal with the 2 people stranded on the rope. The Baltimore Grotto members organized a proper rescue operation. This was exhausting, dangerous work, pulling them up the steep, irregular slope. Through careful coordination and significant effort, they got both people back to the top. Once everyone was accounted for and immediate danger was resolved, the inexperienced group and their overconfident leader were done for the day. They were exiting the cave immediately with no more rope work or exploration. Langstroth Pot Cave Incident. On May 2, 1976, 6 members of the Newcastle University Caving Club went to explore Langstroth Pot Cave. The cave was located in the Yorkshire Dales and was known for its vertical drops and underwater passages. The 6 friends were Martin Blackburn, Brian Fox, Donald Southern, and 3 others. They had been caving together for months and trusted each other completely. In 1976, cave diving equipment was not widely available to most explorers. Free diving through short underwater passages was considered normal practice. The technique was simple. Take a deep breath, swim underwater through the passage, and surface in the next chamber. The group entered Langstroth Pot in good spirits on the clear morning. They moved through the cave chambers carefully, checking their equipment regularly. Water levels were normal, and conditions seemed perfect for their planned route. As they went deeper, they encountered vertical drops and narrow passages. Each obstacle was tackled with careful precision as a team. Hours passed as they navigated the complex cave system underground. Finally, they reached an underwater passage called a sump. It looked no different from other underwater tunnels they had successfully crossed before. Water flowed through a submerged tunnel, and they could see an air pocket on the other side. The plan was simple and routine for experienced cavers like them. The first 3 cavers would swim through the sump and surface in the chamber beyond. Martin Blackburn went first, taking several deep breaths to prepare. He disappeared beneath the dark water with confidence. Brian Fox followed next using the same preparation routine. Donald Southern went last of the first group. All 3 emerged in what appeared to be a perfect air pocket chamber. The chamber seemed like salvation, a place to rest and breathe after the swim. From the perspective of the 3 waiting cavers, everything appeared normal. Their friends had made the dive and presumably surfaced safely. There were no sounds of distress or indication anything was wrong. But what the cavers didn't know was that the air in the chamber was poisoned. The chamber contained bad air where oxygen had been replaced with carbon dioxide. The atmosphere looked, smelled, and felt exactly like normal air. There was no warning or obvious sign of danger. Bad air can develop when organic matter uses up oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. Poor air circulation allows dangerous gases to build up over time. When Martin, Brian, and Donald surfaced, they were breathing poison. The gas was invisible, odorless, and absolutely deadly. With each breath, they took in less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. The effects of bad air are quiet quiet and deceptive, unlike violent drowning. The victims might feel dizzy or confused at first. Their thinking becomes clouded and physical coordination gets worse. Then, without warning, consciousness simply fades away. The three young men had no idea what was happening to them. One moment they were planning their next move through the cave. The next moment their vision blurred and their limbs became heavy. One by one, Martin, Brian, and Donald lost consciousness. They slipped silently beneath the water in the poisoned chamber. They didn't drown in the traditional sense, but were poisoned by the air. Back at the sump entrance, the remaining three waited for their friends. As minutes turned to hours, concern grew among the waiting cavers. They called out but got no response except the sound of flowing water. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to exit and seek help. When rescue teams entered with proper breathing equipment, they made a shocking discovery. The three missing cavers were found floating peacefully in the air pocket chamber. They weren't trapped by rocks or struggling in water. The rescue teams tested the air and found it was toxic. Diepolder Springs Cave Incident. On April 26th, 1999, 29-year-old Guido Gadenzi went technical diving at Diepolder Spring in Florida. Gadenzi was an experienced cave diver with 4 years of technical diving experience. He descended with fellow divers Simone Rancoli and Sandra Dirksen. Their destination was a large underwater chamber 190 feet below the surface. At this crushing depth, water pressure was 6 times greater than at the surface. Technical diving required multiple gas tanks with different mixtures for specific depths. Each diver carried an oxygen bottle for their final decompression stage. Standard protocol required leaving oxygen tanks at the 20-foot mark below surface. This was a critical safety rule because pure oxygen becomes toxic at greater depths. Pure oxygen becomes poison at depths greater than 66 feet under pressure. At deep depths, oxygen concentrations that were safe became deadly. Every technical diver learned this fundamental rule to prevent fatal mistakes. But Gadenzi broke protocol and carried his oxygen bottle throughout the dive. Perhaps he wanted to ensure the gas would be available when needed. Whatever his reasoning, this decision would prove fatal. The descent went smoothly as the three divers moved through clear water. At 190 feet, they reached the underwater chamber like a submerged cathedral. Crushing water pressure would instantly kill an unprotected human. Their specialized equipment allowed them to explore this alien environment. They spent time documenting the chamber and taking photographs. After completing exploration, the team began their dangerous ascent. The gases in their blood had to be released gradually during decompression. They made several stops at predetermined depths to avoid decompression sickness. Their first major stop was at 120 feet below the surface. Here they would hover motionless for several minutes of decompression. At this 120-foot stop, Gadenzi made his fatal error. For unknown reasons, he switched to the oxygen bottle from the surface. Perhaps confusion clouded his judgment, or stress affected his decision-making. The moment pure oxygen entered his lungs at 120 feet, effects were immediate. High pressure forced toxic oxygen concentrations into his bloodstream. This triggered oxygen poisoning in his central nervous system. Gadenzi went into violent convulsions as his nervous system misfired. Within seconds, he lost consciousness completely under the toxic effects. His mouthpiece connecting him to life-sustaining gas fell from his lips. Rancoli and Dirksen watched in horror as their partner became unconscious. At 120 feet underwater, they faced every diver's nightmare scenario. The two divers immediately switched into emergency rescue mode. They tried to get his mouthpiece back in position, but the convulsions made it nearly impossible to maintain equipment placement. At 120 feet, they were still far from surface and couldn't ascend rapidly. Rapid ascent would cause fatal decompression sickness for the rescuers. They needed to maintain their own decompression while trying to save Gadenzi. Minutes passed with the situation becoming increasingly desperate. Gadenzi showed no signs of regaining consciousness. The convulsions continued, preventing effective rescue breathing. His companions faced the horrible reality that their friend was dying. Nothing they could do would prevent the oxygen toxicity death. Martin Cave Incident. Tracy Harrison planned to celebrate her 39th birthday on August 10th in Martin Cave in Missouri. Martin Cave was privately owned but accessible to visitors in the Ozark region. The cave offered natural air conditioning from Missouri's blazing summer heat. The underground temperature was around 60 degrees, perfect relief from outside humidity. Tracy and her friends brought coolers, snacks, drinks, and speakers for an underground party. They wanted something unique and memorable for the birthday celebration. The group entered the cave using flashlights and battery-powered lanterns. They went about 750 feet into the cave system to find a wider chamber. The limestone walls created impressive acoustics for their music and conversations. As they unpacked supplies and set up, the mood was festive and relaxed. Music played from speakers while they arranged food and drinks underground. During the setup, Tracy decided to head back toward the cave entrance alone. She made a fatal mistake by leaving without taking any light source. Her friends were busy setting up the party with music playing and conversations flowing. Nobody immediately noticed her departure in the energetic atmosphere. When they realized she was was gone, they assumed she had taken a flashlight. Cave darkness is absolute, unlike outdoor nighttime where some light exists. Without illumination, navigation becomes impossible and familiar passages turn deadly. Tracy attempted to navigate back through the cave system in total darkness. The limestone floor was uneven and treacherous without proper lighting. As Tracy moved in complete darkness, she lost her footing on the uneven floor. Her foot caught on a stone and she began tumbling through the darkness. What Tracy couldn't see was an 11-foot vertical drop-off in her path. This dangerous section required careful navigation, even with proper lighting. Her slip sent her tumbling over the edge of this precipice. The fall was devastating as 11 feet onto solid limestone caused severe trauma. Tracy struck the rocky floor below with crushing force. The sound of her fall cut through the party atmosphere instantly. The hollow crash echoed off cave walls, silencing the celebration immediately. Music stopped, conversations ceased, and everyone froze at the terrible sound. They abandoned their party setup and frantically searched for the source. When they found Tracy at the base of the drop-off, the scene was nightmarish. She lay unconscious on the limestone floor with severe head trauma. Most alarmingly, she was bleeding from her ears, indicating brain injury. Her friends immediately recognized this required immediate medical attention. They were deep underground with no cell service for emergency calls. One person stayed with Tracy while others rushed to get help. The call reached the National Park Service since the cave was in the current river area. Ranger Kelly Knutson received the report and understood the complexity immediately. As an emergency medical technician, Knutson knew time was critical with head trauma. Bleeding from ears indicated potentially life-threatening brain injuries. Knutson responded by boat via the current river to reach the area quickly. Tracy's friends guided him to the cave entrance upon arrival. Knutson organized the rescue operation with additional rangers and equipment. He entered the cave following the route Tracy's friends had marked. The contrast was stark with party supplies scattered throughout the passage. When Knutson reached Tracy, her condition was grave and she remained unconscious. He immediately began administering oxygen and conducting injury assessment. The rescue required careful coordination between multiple teams underground. Rangers established an evacuation route from Tracy's location to the entrance. Preparing Tracy for transport was painstaking due to potential spinal injuries. Cave evacuation required multiple personnel working in careful relays. The narrow passages made traditional stretcher carrying impossible. As Tracy reached the cave entrance, helicopter transport was coordinated. A park boat transported her to a gravel bar helicopter landing zone. The helicopter crew transferred Tracy to aircraft with advanced life support. She was flown to trauma facilities for emergency brain surgery. The entire rescue took just over 2 hours from emergency call to hospital. Tracy's birthday celebration became a lesson about cave safety precautions.